Hey everyone, and welcome to an exciting video because we've finally got some new AIO coolers from Corsair. And we have a 360mm one, which they're now calling the H150i Pro RGB, because obviously they've got RGB on, and that's a 360mm cooler. And then we've got a 280mm cooler, 240mm fans, which they're calling the H115i Pro. So stay tuned. Okay, so just to let you know, I have tested both of the coolers already. That's why they're already out like this. Now, when you do get the coolers at home, you're going to get all of the kit that you need to mount them. I don't really need to show you that. You're going to get the USB cable if you want to hook up for link to be able to control the coolers and everything properly. But, you know, those sort of things we don't really need to talk about too much. So the things that we do need to talk about are you get 11 visible water channels on the 120mm base radiator, and you get 15 visible water channels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I was just counting because I wanted to make sure that I'd remembered correctly. But anyway, so you do get that. They're about 11 fins per inch as well, which is fairly standard. This one is a 30mm thick radiator. This one comes in at 27mm thick. So they are slightly different. Now, something that I did notice in the specs is the fan speeds, because they both do come with the like a basic ML version of the Corsair fans. But I was expecting the fan speeds to be higher. Because with the older coolers, like the H100i V2, for example, you could get over 2,000 RPM on the fans. They blew an absolute hoolie, and that was one of the reasons why they topped the graphs, was because they moved a massive amount of air. But these are only 1,600 RPM, and these are only 1,200 RPM. Now, the maglevs were kind of famed for the fact that they could go from 400 to 2,400 RPM, and you had a massive range available. And the MLs, because I keep calling them maglev, but let's face it, that's what we all refer them to. They do have that very, very low end, so you get that massive range. But you have the option, if you really want to crank the fans up, you can get extra cooling performance there. So I'm kind of perplexed about why they held these back so low, but it's going to give us something to talk about later on in the video anyway. So you do get the backlit section on here, which I'll show you. It's RGB. You do need to connect the USB to be able to control that properly. The clip for the back does come off really easily, and this one is the Intel one fitted, but it's got mounts for all the AMD ones as well, other than TR4. So if you want Threadripper, that's going to be an optional extra that you'll have to buy separately. Now, with it being an optional extra, it does raise the discussion point about the cold plate maybe not being big enough. But you could also say that maybe the numbers that Threadripper is selling, for argument's sake, might not be enough to send it out. I don't know. There's a whole, you know, we could sit and have a massive debate at the pub about why it didn't come with a TR4 bracket. I think it's probably because of the cold plate size, personally. But anyway, if they send me one, I will test it. So on the actual cooler itself, the cables that come out, you've got your SATA power cable, and then you have the fan splitter so that you can power the fan. So on the 360, there's 3 of them. On the 280, there is 2 of them. Braid on the hose is actually really nice and soft, right the way down to the ends, and what you can see on the actual pump itself, as they are very flexible as well. The hose itself is very flexible too. I'm just kind of showing you extremes here, just so that you do get an idea for what's going on. But I think it's probably time that I show them in a rig. Okay, so our first look at it all lit up. What you can see, I mean, I think you pretty much guessed that we were going to have this was all going to be lit up anyway, but you can see that you've got a second strip around the bottom, almost like a little bit of a backlight. and you can change the colours. You can have it on static, you can have it on a thing called colour pulse, where it fades in and out of each colour, and you can have up to 7 colours on your colour pulse. You can have it going red, blue, red, blue, red, blue if you wanted to. The easiest one to show you the different colours though, and this one is just restarting, this is the rainbow mode. You can set it to temperature as well, so that you can just with a quick look have a scan in your rig and you'll be able to see what temperature your CPU is at. So there are a few options there for you, but I think most of us are probably going to end up setting a static colour to match with our systems. Now, it is RGB, but it's not RGB in a sense of like the Strix board that's there. You can change the colours and it dances around the outside or anything like that. It's just one colour that you can have, and I've not been able to work out any way that I could get it to sync with the Aura software either. You have to use Corsair Link to change this. Okay then, so on to a relatively meaty conclusion, because randomly there is quite a bit that we have to talk about. First of all, is they seem to have gone really quiet. I talked to you about the fan speeds earlier on. So we've got 1200 RPM on the 140s, and then we've got 1600 RPM on the 120s. The normal ML fans go up to 2400 RPM. So straight away there, they've put a massive cap down on that. But also, I don't know whether any of you have had Corsair coolers in the past, but you used to get a thing where when you first started them up, especially if Link was connected, they used to do a full speed start. And now, this is off. And that's now running. And what it does is it starts the fans up at the absolute lowest fan speed, and then it takes, while it's posting all that sort of stuff, it does it based on the coolant temperature until Link kicks in and everything can kind of sort itself out and it can control itself. Now, if you run them at max, 1600 RPM, I would say that they are in an average kind of noise level. But if you were to put H150i V2 by the side of it at max, it would literally drown this out by orders of magnitude. And that's the 360. If you put the 280, so the twin 140s on max, at 1200 RPM, those fans are massively quiet. Now, one thing I will say is Corsair, they send out a reviewer's guide with stuff when they send stuff like this out to people like me. And they said, don't test with 1151 processors. And that's not because they're not good on 1151 processors, it's just that the 1151 processors are a bit of a minefield. Now, we've tested with our normal CPU that we would have done, and that's why our graphs are so big, because we've been building these graphs to be able to formulate comparisons for a long time. You wouldn't be able to get a cooler like this and literally, build a graph this big out of it. Or if we had to test like 10 coolers every time we did a review because we changed the processor. Anyway, so we used our normal 6700K, but I did at the end chuck this rig together, which is an 8700K, so I can talk to you about some of those temperatures as well. So I'm hopefully going to cover lots of bases. But what Corsair actually wanted us to do was use the 2011 processors, like, for example, the 7900X or the 7900XE or 7980XE, just to absolutely pummel them with as much heat as possible. So in some ways I've kind of helped, and then in other ways, because I've only used a low-end processor, I kind of haven't. But the results that we got, as you'll see, did do fairly well anyway. So there's, and I'm just being completely open and honest about all of this. But like I said, we've tested this the way that we do. We have done all of the other coolers. Now what I'll do is I'll bang you up, because we did the quiet, balanced and performance tests, but we also did it at 4.2 gigahertz at 1.2 volts, 4.6 at 1.3 volts, and 4.7 at 1.35 volts on a 6700K, because they are the tests that we've been doing for ages. So that's why these graphs are all kind of relative. The old 6700K didn't overclock that well, needed quite a lot of volts, actually got quite hot as well. Now the reason why Corsair were kind of funny about the newer 1151 processors, KB Lake and Coffee Lake, are where they're not soldered anymore, because they can kill too many when they make them. then now they've got thermal paste. And the problem with that is once the volts go up, it's not the cooler that can't keep up with the cooling. It's the fact that the thermal paste can't get the heat away from the silicon and into the metal IHS quick enough. So that's where the problem lies. So your temperatures will be like kind of even, and you go up one notch on your volts, and then all of a sudden you're hitting 90 odd degrees, and that's what's happening. It overloads the thermal paste and IHS cooling capability, and you'll get that on all coolers. You could have a stack of radiators with stupid fans going on, and it would still end up doing it, because that's, you know, I've explained why anyway. So you can see that the cooler did very well. It's the 280 was mixing it up there, beating some of the 360mm ones that we've done. It's the 280's beating all of the 280mm tests that we've done in the past. And then the 360, the H150i, you can see did really well at the top. There was a couple of weird ones that we noticed where like the quiets were doing slightly better than the balanced, and we went back and tested those numerous amounts of times, and we weren't exactly sure. It was mainly, I'm pretty sure it was the H115 at quiet seemed to perform better than it in balance mode. It's probably some weird kind of fan profile thing. I'm not 100% sure, but like I said, we retested it. We tested it with different ambient temperatures as well, just to make sure we did a balanced run from an entirely cold system. We tried everything, and they kept coming out like that. Not sure why. Maybe it's some weird firmware thing. You know, genuinely don't know, but that's the way that the performance results came out. But either way, the be-all and end-all from this is, we wanted to talk about the 8700K. 8700K. So normal 5 gigahertz, 1.3 volts. Get that in there, tested. It was keeping all the temperatures below 80 degrees. But like I said, we are on the cusp at that point of overloading the thermal interface on the processor. It doesn't matter what cooler that you get, if you're going to get like an 8700K, if you want to overclock the absolute nuts out of it, you are going to need to either get a silicon lottery winner, which means that you'll get one that will overclock with lower volts. But once you get above 1.3 volts, you will find all coolers will struggle, because it's not the cooler's fault, it's the processor's fault. And that's when you need to start thinking about de-lidding, putting liquid metal in instead of that thermal paste and getting it all back on, or, you know, buying a pre-binned processor from someone like Overclockers, or even DeBauer's doing silver topped ones now, where they de-lid it for you and put a bit of silver back on the top as the IHS rather than the normal aluminium copper mix that we get with these. So there's lots of complexities, which is kind of one of the reasons why we may upgrade our test rig and go for something like absolute heat monster again. But it is something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is the fact that out of the box, they don't come with a TR4 adapter. They are going to be available separately. I don't know whether they're not expecting to sell a lot of them or something, but something to keep in mind is the cooler plate, the cooling plate, cold plate, is quite small, and we do know with the size of Threadripper TR4 that does respond to much bigger cold plates, because when you put it into context of how big the processor is and then how big the cold plate is, you can see that there is a huge difference. So that is something to keep in mind. It will still cool it absolutely fine, but you're not going to be able to get massive overclocks or anything like that. You will experience some slightly higher temperatures. I don't know whether they're going to do like a cold plate adapter or something like that. I genuinely don't know. But from the testing that we've seen in the past, the coolers with the bigger cold plate suit the Threadripper platform better. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, where you know what's most important to you, what do you want to get from it. I think the fact that you have to buy the bracket separately kind of shows that they're more focused on Ryzen and the Intel platform than Threadripper, which, let's face it, if there was a platform that you needed to drop that is probably the most niche one. So, you know, that's something for you to kind of keep in mind as well. So the pump and the noise performance on it, much quieter than I've been used to with any of the Corsair coolers in the past. That's kind of brought down with the fan speeds as well, because they've brought the fan speeds down. You've got the ML technology in the fans. It kind of ticks all the boxes. You've got multiple options in Corsair Link for easy fan profiles that you can just go in and click. There's even a 0 dB one, so that it will turn it off at low temperatures. Anything below a coolant temperature of 40 degrees, the fans won't even spin. So there are many things you can go in and tweak around with. I've spoken to you about the lights. But at the end of the day, it's actually really nice to see Corsair, A, with a 360, because it has felt like they've needed one for a while, but more the kind of the pump and the aesthetics refresh, so that we've got new coolers to play with. Do you know what I mean? People building new systems, you know, they want to get something new. I really like the fact that you've got the little light ring around the outside as well. I think it might have been nicer if there had been more options for being able to play with the lighting. I don't know what's going on with how the lighting is made underneath, but the fact that it's just colours and fades at the moment, especially compared to some of the competition, or one of them specifically being the Kraken, feels a little bit more limiting. But the software, I know we always get people moaning about pretty much every manufacturer's software, but we didn't have any problems with this, changing fan speeds, changing lights, setting profiles. You know, all of that stuff was very click and play. We didn't have any issues during the time of testing, and we tested it on, let's face it, 2 completely different platforms as well, because we ended up changing the motherboard and the processor because we needed to go up to Coffee Lake to do the 8700K tests. And we tested that with both coolers and all the different fan profiles as well. So we spent quite a lot of time messing around with it. Now, I would say personally, the H115 Pro, I'd actually genuinely give that the Silence Award, because that cooler is so quiet and can still pack a punch when it comes to actual cooling. It's unreal. So if you're looking for something and you've not got a massive case, but you want to build something performance, but keep the noise right down, the 115 is epic. The 150 is more the one that you kind of step into when you want a little bit more cooling performance, or you want that bigger space. Now, you can still turn the fan speeds down and get some decent temperatures from this, but it obviously, with that extra 400 RPM on the top, it does give you a little bit more leeway for if you do want to crank the volts up that little bit more, depending on the processor that you've got. So the 150 I would give the Performance Award, but they both, like I said, they both look really nice, perform really well, but they're actually quite different in the way that they can perform. So the separation between them has actually been quite kind of cool, and to be able to test them side by side, straight one after another as well, is actually given me quite a lot to talk about, as you've seen. So I would say two very different coolers. Now, if you were to, let's say, put the aftermarket ML fans on, which you can get in a selection of colours, or the ML RGBs, they do have a 400 to 2400 RPM range on it. So if you were to change the fans on them as well, you could actually eke out even more performance if needed, although you do need to remember that the trade-off for that is going to be more noise. And I think Corsair do genuinely deserve a bit of a tip of the cap for the fact that they have gone down the quiet route with these, because the reason why they topped the grass pretty much in the past is because at the end of the day they had an option on them where the fans blew an absolute hoolie, and it was never something that you could use at that kind of level on a day-to-day basis. Whereas with these, what they've done with these is they've managed to get the best of both worlds, where you've got one that's not that noisy, one that's what I would actually call pretty damn quiet, and yet they're still doing incredibly well in the graphs when compared to the competition. So there's my review, peeps. Finally had some new coolers from Corsair. It's all very exciting. One thing I will say though is if you watch this video on the day that it goes live, I'm actually in Vegas. So go to the TTL Facebook page, go to TTL Instagram, keep an eye on the website, because I am at CES and it's the first time for me.